diplomatic deep freeze between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And one possible step in that direction has perhaps come in the skies. Reports that the Saudis are for the first time going to open up their airspace for direct flights to Israel, granting that permission to Air India for its 3 times a week route from New Delhi to Tel Aviv.
A Saudi aviation authority official denied that claim to Bloomberg News when asked, but El Al Airlines seemed to believe it. It issued a statement today demanding it be given the same right of way, saying, "We believe and hope this agreement is valid for Israeli companies as well, and not just for foreign companies, since it is clear that Israeli passengers on foreign airlines who are allowed to fly over Saudi Arabia aren't different from Israeli passengers flying on Israeli airlines." I-24 News also contacted Air India, the Israel Airports Authority, and both countries' embassy. No response as of now. Joining us right here in the studio, Lior Weintraub, former spokesman to the Israeli embassy in India, and David Weiner, a reporter for Bloomberg News here in Israel. David, what exactly did Bloomberg hear from Saudi Arabia? Probably not so comfortable to be confronted with this kind of a story so public.
Right. So they're denying that any permission has been given. With that said, it's not totally unexpected that the Saudis would deny this story. So we shouldn't rule it out. But for now, we're hearing a flat denial of the story.
But it could be that they have agreed and they just don't want it publicized.
Right. One could speculate that that's a possibility.
This would be a rare case, though. Normally, when we hear stories about Saudi Arabia and Israel, for that matter, the denials, you can never really know what happened behind the scenes. In this case, when those flights start flying, if they do, it'll be pretty clear. What's your take when hearing the story? Does this feel like a breakthrough to you?
First of all, yes. Let's refresh our memory for a second. 2009, former Senator Mitchell, then the special envoy of President Obama, offered the formula in which Israel was supposed to freeze the settlement, and Arab in return was supposed to supply some deliverable. One of them was the flyover rights from India to Israel, but they declined. I mean, the sense against, the feeling, the sentiment against any kind of normalization was so hard, right. It was so tough that they didn't want even to have an airplane, Israeli airplane over their country. So I think today it's obvious that something is moving, and what we see is the first visible indication of what is going on behind the scene. It's the first indication of the new reality in the Middle East. New Middle East, not the kind of Middle East that we spoke for years about, but this is an indication, even if they'll deny it, or even if it won't happen in the next few months, I think it shows that something is moving, and there are things that are more ripe to move to the forefront than behind the scene.
David, India and Saudi Arabia, they have pretty big economic ties, and there are many people from India and the surrounding countries working in Saudi Arabia. So it would perhaps lend some credibility that it might be Air India that would be getting this first step.
Exactly, and this allows the Saudi Arabian government to say if they eventually have to admit it, it's like they gave the right to Air India. Netanyahu was just in India. I was actually on that visit with him, right. And he told a crowd of business people in Mumbai, we're working on this. It's going to be, and people around there were talking about an Air India flight. So, I mean, that certainly allows everybody to sort of say, pretend that nothing major has been happening here,
Lior, from your work in India, working with Israeli authorities also, do you think it's reasonable to think that India itself, the government, might have played some sort of mediation role in a deal like this?
I think, sometimes in diplomacy, in order to build a relationship, it's not necessarily bilateral. You need another player to help you build the relationship. And I think this is a win-win situation. I mean, in terms of the visibility and growing the relationship between India and Israel, this is a big motivation.
Do you think there would be willingness in India to play that role?
No doubt about it. I think they would like to see them playing a role. I don't know if they can play an actual conducive role to promote, but they can facilitate some actions that can bring the right atmosphere.
David, I know at Bloomberg that El Al is one of the companies that you cover here, and it is a company that has had issues in recent years on the business level, and of course India, a very popular destination for Israelis, so they definitely have a vested interest in seeing that this get extended beyond Air India.
Right, so El Al is saying, we welcome this decision, this is great for Israel, but where's our part here? We'd like to be flying this as well. Of course, it's a bit more complicated to land. If you need an emergency landing, you've got an Israeli flag on the airplane. So right. It's a bit more. It's a
national. We should point out it's right. Israel's national airline. It's right. not just another private airline that operates here in Israel.
Right.
David, I'm interested in your take in the bigger picture. We're talking a lot here also about this potential warming of ties between Saudi Arabia and Israel, certainly behind the scenes. Do you notice a marked shift over the last several months? We saw some high-profile interviews, for example, with Israeli officials in Saudi papers. Do you think there really is something to all the stories?
For sure. I think, basically, even the muted reaction to the Jerusalem decision,
Right.
you can see that that things are changing. And I think what you can see, and Lior mentioned, for years people have been talking about this. I'm told that during the Oslo talks, this was a serious request, and the Saudis just...
Airspace, the airspace issue.
Yeah. But I think, there are a few changes happening here. Obviously, MBS is in control. Trump has been, in charge for a year now.
With apparently very close ties with the Saudi prince.
Right. So you can definitely tell there's a realignment here, and, this would be a very small step. It's not going to boost the GDP of Israel or anything like that. But this is the kind of thing that could, sort of open trade and help Israel really overcome a bunch of obstacles, and.
And perhaps push diplomacy would follow a little more in that wake?
A little bit, and not just diplomacy. There are 50,000 Israelis traveling to India each year, and this will save them about 3 hours of flight.
3 hours.
I used to fly with Royal Jordanian when I served in India, and believe me, this will be a significant change. It will improve the life of people who are traveling for both sides, and I think for the business community as well. So it's a big step. Sometimes it's not just a normal thing, but it's a big step.
Briefly, Lior, do you find in your experience as a diplomat, and especially in that part of the world, that it is easier to make sort of economic deals than political decisions?
Most of diplomacy right now is economic,
Economics.
right? Not a lot of diplomatic political decisions that you can take to improve the relationship right now, short of actually forming the relationship. And by the way, let me remind you that 25 years ago, Indian citizens used to have a passport that said that it's valid to all countries except Israel. Yeah. So just